Hi, my name's Lloyd Levine.
And my name is Rachel Strassman. And this is
Policy Chats.
Policy Chats is the official podcast of the School of Public Policy at the University of California, Riverside. Policy Chats is our student-produced podcast series where we bring in guests to discuss potential solutions to today's biggest societal challenges through the lens of public policy. While my classmates and I are the usual hosts,
for the next 11 weeks, I will be guest hosting a special series on the intersection of technology and government. This podcast series, sponsored by the Wall Street Journal Higher Education Fund, is based on my recent book, Technology versus Government: The Irresistible Force Meets the Immovable Object. This series explores different aspects of the challenges facing governments as they try to keep pace with the rapidly evolving technology landscape. We will try to understand why it is that government struggles to purchase and integrate modern technologies. We will explore the problems resulting from that technology lag and try to understand the future implications if government does not change its approach to technology integration. The episodes track with the sections and chapters in the book, with a focus on the problems, the people, and the future. Welcome to Policy Chats. Joining me today is the co-author, lead author really, of Chapter 1 in the book, which really looks at one of the main topics of the book. Why do governments fail at purchasing and integrating technologies? John Thomas Flynn, the godfather of GovTech, I guess. John has been a friend of mine for a number of years, and I actually was on your TV show right after I signed the contract to write the book, and then you and I did this first chapter together. John, for those of you who don't know him, he is the first CIO of the state of Massachusetts and the first CIO for the state of California. I don't think there's anybody in the country who can make the claim to be the first CIO of two states other than you. Heavily involved in federal tech policy, state tech policy for 30 plus years now, 40 years now. Really just an amazing resource. And I think the chapter that we wrote is just, it's fantastic. I think it just really gets to the heart of things. The purpose of this podcast is really not to recite the chapter, however. Sure. I want people to read the book. I don't want people to listen to the podcast instead of reading the book. The purpose of this podcast really is to take the chapters that are in the book and go to the next level. Use them as a jumping off point. But before we do that, it is probably a good idea to summarize the first chapter. So why don't you go ahead and summarize the first chapter of Technology versus Government: The Irresistible Force Meets the Immovable Object?
Okay, Lloyd, thank you very much for the introduction. Looking very much forward to this. Very excited to have the book out, and really looking forward to hearing from the other chapter authors. As far as my case, talking about California, it's some of the subtitles that will be talked about in the very beginning were about why does California have such a hard time successfully implementing technology projects, considering especially where it's located with so many IT companies, stellar IT companies, academia, etc., available at least.
You're right on. Home of Silicon Valley, you would think if any state would get it right, it'd be California. Although, we did use a little bit of Massachusetts and a lot of California, but I think we both agreed a lot of these principles, the errors are not California's alone, and the principles can apply to pretty much any state in the country and most large and cities and counties as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
And certainly we've seen that, whether the failures have been at the Department of Child Support in some particular state, California and others, or the Federal Aviation Administration, IRS, so on and so on. But the policies I think we came up with in this chapter are really relevant to all different, particularly public sector organizations, state, local, federal. It's so much is at stake in how they're run, and in many ways they're very similar challenges in the public sector you don't really have in the private sector. So I'm looking forward to getting into that discussion about those differences, the nuances, et cetera, about federal versus state versus local, and of course versus the public sector, the private sector as well. But most of all, I want to talk about the fact that after looking at so many things in government, and I was mentioning earlier, talking with Rachel, that I grew up here in Washington, D.C., where I'm located now, although I've been away for more than a quarter of a century until the last couple of years. But growing up here in D.C., my father was a federal employee, went from GS1, went to law school at night, went up to, when he retired, he was in the senior executive service. I mean, he had a very nice 30-year plus career in government. But I always remember the fact when he and I were maybe playing golf together on the public courses around D.C., and we'd get into a discussion with our partners, and he'd mentioned that he worked for the federal government, and there was always that kind of, we know about you feds, you're just fat and lazy, et cetera, kind of thing. And it really got my goat, because I think all along I've always gotten very, very passionate about good government. And I don't just mean, going along to get along. I mean, really tackling some terrific issues that so many people are hesitant to tackle. And a lot of that has to do with not having the power and the capability and the authority to get things done. I mean, it's easy to be some lower level person with an idea about changing something, but when you're almost to the top in some high level government position and you try to make changes, particularly to other agencies, when you're not on the same level, you're going to run into roadblocks like you can't imagine. So it's tough. It's tough, but it's very exciting. And I think some of the ideas we came up with are very relevant and will be well accepted.
All right. No, I appreciate that. So we put this, this is chapter 1, leads off the book. And as chapter 1 really, is part of the first section, and the first section deals with the problems. It's different perspectives of the different problems. We look at policy as a failure. We look at planning and procurement as a failure in chapter 2. This chapter really looks at the main thrust of this chapter, although we do touch on a number of other issues, is the organizational structure of the government that we articulate leads to failures. It's the foundation of technological implementation and procurement. It comes from the organizational structure of government. And at the end of the chapter, we actually came up with 4 major recommendations. Do you want to talk a little bit about the what we call the strong CIO model? That was the number 1, versus a weaker CIO. The number 1 recommendation that we make in here, and you think it makes sense, is to really have an empowered state CIO.
Oh, without a question. And that fact has resonated and been fed back to me by all the state CIOs and authorities for CIO organizations across the public sector who have said, if I didn't have that seat at the table, I wouldn't have taken this job. The problem being, only about a half a dozen of the people in half a dozen states have a CIO in that kind of with that kind of authority and responsibility. They keep saying, reports come out, well, all the governors have appointed their state CIO. Well, yeah, being appointed a state CIO is not the same thing as being on the cabinet. And I had to learn that the hard way.
The governors appoint deputy directors to all the agencies as well as the CIO. Yeah. So, yeah.
So it's really difficult to take that and run with it and think you've got something. When you really don't, you have to really look at it. Just what does it mean? And certainly I had the experience and some of the things I had to shake my head at. Everything from just like we talked about in the preface, if you will, to my chapter. We talk about the here win, about the fact that a government employee bureaucrat told me in Sacramento when I first came there. He said, Flynn, I'm a here win. I said, well, what's a here win? He said, I'm here when you got here and I'll be here when you leave. All indications were that he was going to outlast me, and anything I wanted to really change, I was going to have a hell of a long time to do it, hard time to do it, and he was going to be right there to block my way if he could. So it was a wake-up call and a challenge which I said, I'll accept that because I'm trying to do something different here. I'm trying to play the kind of role that the governor, whoever is the appointing authority, whoever wants me to fill. And I'm not going to shy away from trying to take on the hard decisions. If the if the governing body, if you will, won't back me up, well, I understand. I probably shouldn't stay in the position if that's the case. But if I do have that kind of backing to get things done, it makes a lot of difference. And it makes a lot of difference for being a CIO with that kind of authority and my sponsorship by the CEO, the governor, if you will.
So let's we'll come back to some more of the recommendations. It's going to be a dialogue here, and we'll weave in and out of things. As I was listening to you talk, one thing I was thinking about is, there's a whole host of historic and current technologies within state governments. Mm-hmm. Everything from the mundane, cell phones and laptops for employees of every, or computers for employees of every department in the state. Obviously in the old days, there were mainframe servers. There's, cloud storage. We've got, and every department needs to have cloud storage. There's email. And all states are structured differently. A lot of the states in the central part of the country are what we call centralized states, where more of the technology decisions, even ones like cell phones, really flow through the CIO's office and aren't left to the departments. What levels of technology? What would you see as it? Let's just say we put the CIO in the cabinet. It's now, as California once had, a Secretary of Technology. How would you do a division of labor, division of responsibilities? What would the CIO be responsible for? What would, say, the Department of Toxic Resources, or the Department of Recycling, or the Department of Health and Human Services? How would you split up who was responsible for what?
Well, you're starting off with the real easy questions, aren't you, Lloyd? So they're certainly one of them. It's very difficult to differentiate in many ways, particularly because of the ebb and flow of government responsibility and the division of labor, shall I say, or new positions of labor. I mean, chief data officer, chief policy, privacy officer, policy, and so on and so on. Not to mention security. I mean, right now, security, my director of security in mid-90s or early to mid-90s, he was physical security. That was really the only thing. We didn't have to worry about anything else. The only incident we had is when some guy, one of the programmers, tried to look into the tax records to see how much Boston Celtics great Larry Bird was making for salaries, and we had to suspend him for a couple of days. But that was the extent of it. It was nothing like things that go on. But here's the thing. Gradually, as those security professionals got involved and grew into the bureaucracy themselves, they usually reported almost invariably to the chief information officer. Well, that's changing. All the time it's changing. That security position has gotten so high that consequently the governor wants a piece of the action. A lot of times you'll find that security official will be reporting into the governor's office. And if the governor doesn't have a good relationship with the security official, well, there's a good chance there's some kind of it's like a board of directors of a company. If you don't have a relationship with your company CIO, you've done away with your fiduciary responsibility, and that's true with the CIO. So it's become a job that's moving around now, usually moving out of the CIO's perspective, and now more of a executive level executive level governor responsibility and authority, and that's good and bad, I guess. Being a former CIO, I didn't like to lose any authority, and it's hard for the CIO not to get involved in something like security. So that's a real tough issue, and it's still not being resolved yet. And at the same time, you see these other positions, like a chief data officer for one, chief privacy officer, some of the others I mentioned. They're floating around the bureaucracy. I still think there's a case to be made that many of these things can best be managed out of a strong, centralized CIO shop. And I'm probably going to stick to the guns on that.
No, I think whether you call them a CIO or Secretary of Technology, I would agree. I think you have to have a single point of accountability. I'm kind of wondering about, kind of implementation. As you think about, there was a department at one point asked me, for technology, could you help us monitor a Superfund site? Is there a way that, the technologies that the company I work for, can they help us manage a Superfund site? Are those decisions left to the CIO? Are they left to the department? At what level? As we're transitioning away, in the old days, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was mainframes, and the departments didn't have much touch on the mainframes. But now you've got departments looking at technology solutions that are unique to their department.
Right.
the Georgia Department of Driver Services, for example, has a solution where they can administer your driving test remotely. Is that a technology? It's networked, but is that a technology that should be left to them, or does that go to the CIO? If you had a magic wand, how would you structure the bureaucracy so you had a Secretary of Technology, the CTO, the Chief Privacy Officer, the CISO, all reported to the CIO or the Secretary of Technology? But how would you divide the responsibilities, not amongst the team for the Secretary, but amongst the other agencies? What is it that the other agencies turn over to the CIO for management, and what do they keep?
Yeah, and certainly let's not forget that when we're talking before the 90s, at least the middle 90s, most of your large agencies in states, DMV, Department of Revenue, all the large agencies had their own data center. They managed it by themselves, and they had their arms grappled around it. Because I remember one of the first tasks I had was trying to consolidate those data centers and tear them away from the cabinet secretaries that owned them, who were told that data center leaves their building, the whole agency will have to go out of business. And you had to fight that attitude, and I couldn't convince the secretaries to do that because I didn't have the authority to do it, or the responsibility, or the backing of the governor to do it. So before I get away from that, though, I wanted to say that those are important considerations too. But now where we can make those kind of decisions to say, okay, we're going to have not only a state CIO, this Secretary of Transportation, if you will, but we're going to have each agency. Now, remember we've talked about the structure of a government. You have the executive office and the governor. Then you have cabinet secretaries for all the agencies. And underneath all the agencies, you have 10, 20, 30, 40 different departments. So in that kind of environment, I took the lesson from Ralph's, I always get his name mixed up. It's like Zavenda. He was the CIO for a number of companies. In fact, General Motors, which was probably the largest company at the time. And he instituted a CIO governance model where he was the CIO that was executive level, and underneath him in each department, each agency, I should say, had an agency CIO, and each department had a department CIO. And that triumvirate, if you will, was responsible for coordinating across all levels of government everything that was done. So when that person at the Department of Motor Vehicles has to bring up a new technology for testing, remote testing, or anything else like that, it's filtered through those various levels all the way to the top. Starts at the bottom where it's necessary, where somebody comes up with this idea, flows to the top to look for funding to get it done, and then manages it once the funding's approved. But I think in that way you keep those kinds of I used to call them renegade IT initiatives. You keep them in check because you're managing it, and you have that tri-level of responsibilities and tiers. And it had to be remembered that like Zavenda, the general manager CIO said, I have performance evaluation authority on all lower level CIOs. And that's saying a lot. You don't see that very often in government, but it's getting that way for some of the real successful models that have that kind of empowered CIO with the backing of the governor, and also the responsibility and the relationship with their peers at the cabinet level.
Yeah, no, as I think about it, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the Department of Social Services here in California. They have a CIO, and they have a technology team of, I believe, 245 or 55 employees.
Probably.
That's just for the one department. And so, a lot of these larger agencies, they're spread out all over the state. They do have their own large technology teams, separate and distinct from, say, the California Department of Technology. And that's what I'm trying to tease out kind of as we look at, and let's just forget about political realities for a second. Just if you had a magic wand, if you were the governor and you had the ability to not govern unchecked, but to reorganize and restructure the government for 21st century technology, efficiency, effectiveness, however you want to define that. Clearly you'd have a Secretary of Technology, and then, from there, what would you do?
Well, like I said, you'd have each cabinet secretary, each cabinet agency would have a agency CIO,
Mhm.
And that person would report to the state CIO, the Secretary of Technology. And under the agency CIO, you'd have a...
John, so right now, the agency CIOs may work with CDT, California Department of Technology, but they are hired by and report to the deputy directors and the directors within the agency. Are you suggesting, and there's no right or wrong answer, are you suggesting that now that they are CDT employees but placed in the agency? Or is it, how do you structure that org chart if you're saying they report to the state CIO, which is very different from what it is now?
Categorically, I would say that I want the state CIO at the top to have responsibility and evaluation authority for those people underneath them. And they could be in the agency department and they could be in the agency itself. But I'm just saying you can't you can't think of all the lines of, well, those people are going to be appointed within the agency. They can be. They have been. Don't work.
Okay.
So I would say the stronger CIO is going to have authority for all that. And like I said, I want my office to evaluate those people and do their performance evaluations to make sure they're getting things done in their agency. I don't see other way to do it. Otherwise, you're just letting the renegade run loose.
So, let's just let's shift from mainframes 50 years ago to large scale. And by large scale, I don't mean warehouse size, but, tens of thousands of endpoint IoT solutions that may be a unique IoT solution to that agency. So for example, there's a pilot project that I'm aware of in one state where they're demoing a new technology, demonstrating testing a new technology for highway lighting. Right now, highway lights are either on or they're off. The new technologies would create a new head unit that would go into each one of them. It would be an IoT solution, so they would now communicate to each other and back to to the central office. And it would have multiple functionality, and there could be upwards of 15 to 20,000 endpoints. Does that but it's unique because it's highway lighting, which is administered by the Department of Transportation. Does that stay with the purchase and implementation of a solution like that? And we could look at any different other ones. Does that stay with the Department of Transportation? Does the CIO now have oversight? How would you?
I got you. And let me answer it this way. There have been cases, and there's certainly as long as 15 years ago, where states consolidated all their information technology, took all those individual agency and department IT officials and rolled them into the cabinet agency for technology. So they went from being an employee of Health and Human Services to an employee of the IT agency. Big, major change. And that's gradually happening, but at the same time, I'm also seeing it being disassociated and breaking up. Because these are very, very impactful things to do in a large bureaucracy, particularly one done if there's any kind of collective bargaining environment where you're going to get resistance to those kind of changes. But ideally, I'd want every single one of those IT people reporting into my shop and evaluated on what they're doing and how successful they are in doing it. And if there's a ascendancy of the business managers from a department that say, hey, we want to take a look at lighting, be my guest. You've got IT people in ours that are basically embedded in your department that'll be happy to help you work on that. And they don't have to work for you; they'll work for me, and as will everybody else. I could be a real dictator then, huh?
Which brings us to the fourth kind of recommendation that we have, at the conclusion, which is engaged, program executive support. That's we defined a lot of terms to distinguish between technology leadership and the program leadership. Those would be the Department of Transportation, the people whose job it is to utilize the previous example, the highway lighting system. So how do you achieve that agency department head support? I mean, I know one of the things we tried to tactfully argue in here is some of that may be a problem that takes care of itself as time marches on. One of the things that we argued in this chapter is, the people who traditionally had ascended to the positions of secretary, had been in government a while and they didn't grow up in a technology culture. They were not as technology forward as the next generation, what we call Generation T. And that is, more and more people who are technologically focused become agency deputy directors, directors. On the natural, they're going to be more curious and interested in technology. Is that alone enough? How do you get that engaged executive support that's necessary? Because I would agree. And before I turn it over to you completely, it's interesting. I read a book and I recommended it to you as well, Recoding America by Jennifer Polka. Fantastic book. Usually books on technology and government. I view a little dubiously because most of them are written by people outside government, and it's relatively easy because they're just pontificating from on high. You should do this and you should do that. Yeah. Jennifer's book nails it, but she also spent 10 plus years, founding and running Code for America, where she was ingrained in government and then was in the Obama White House with U.S. Digital Government Services. So she did have that insider perspective, and her book is fantastic. One of the things that she argues, rightly so, and I think you'll kind of the light bulb will go on. She says government has project managers, the private sector has product managers, and really the government, and this kind of thing, this goes back to the engaged executive support. The government really needs to get on board and have product managers, not project managers. So kind of answer both of those in one if you can.
Well, what does she define a product manager in government to mean? What would be the difference between that and a project manager?
So a project manager, and is somebody who I'm managing this project and it's following the steps along the way. And this is something you and I have talked about before. Government is very process oriented. Actually going to borrow Jen's reference. If the in her book, she says, if the specs say build a cement boat, they build a cement boat. No one stops to ask if it's going to float. She's actually got another great example where there was a whole bunch of people around the table, and the lowest ranking person finally at the end spoke up. And what they were doing was creating this giant system that needed all this computing power, and it was supposed to run on a field device that didn't have that computing power. And the guy's like, how are we going to do this? And that would be kind of the difference, build a cement boat versus the product. What does the product do, and is it effective at doing what it's doing, not just a rigid and blind adherence to the process? You know as well as I do that, that's government has a process, and people don't get fired if they adhere to the process,
right?
Regardless of the degree of outcome.
Yeah, and certainly when you're talking about these product managers or project managers, you'll find a lot of times that they're up against a wall in a hard place because of what they're asked to do. Like you say, if they follow those rules, they're going to get a boat that doesn't float.
And that's essentially what Jen is arguing in her book is instead of making sure that the process was followed and checking all the boxes, look at the product. Is the product doing what we need it to do, or did the process create a product that is useless and irrelevant?
Well, I think that goes back to the user acceptance of whatever they're come up with, because if you don't have that user involvement in the design and production of the actual application, it's going to be a failure because it's not going to meet the proper tests, or the business managers are going to just wipe their hands of it and say, hey, I'll be retiring before this thing's ever done, so I don't care. So it is a constant challenge to keep involved in these kind of projects, particularly at the lower level, and to see that this whole management style and attitude about technology flows down from the very top all the way down to that person on the front lines who's designing and producing a various IT application. You can't just have them in a vacuum developing these things as they do. I mean, I remember in California, the budget was so big, every year they come out with a new budget. The governor comes out with a new budget. I don't know. It's up to probably $300 billion now, whatever. It's and I asked the people in the budget department, well, how many of them are IT projects? They couldn't tell me. I said, well, every year at least 100 to 200 new projects are evaluated. Where are they? How much are they going to be spent on? Nobody seems to know. And that was the difference between, I think, having a versed organization, top to bottom, and involvement in these kind of decisions, and involvement in such a way that makes sure that these kind of fiascos and debacles don't happen again. And they happen because the people that are going to be ones that say, I'll accept this model, I'll accept this new application because I've seen and I guaranteed and I managed it and I implemented it like it should work, and it will. You don't have that now. I don't think you get that so much. And frankly, it's one of those things I believe where a lot of people, and particularly in government, are afraid to take those kind of stands. I mean, you're talking about career is over, not just for the CIO, but all the way down to the bottom level. And it might not mean you're going to be fired on the street, but you're certainly not going to be successful in that organization. You're going to make your way over to another one, something else, and same problems are going to remain. So it's a challenge, like I said. I mean, these jobs are not easy, and they haven't gotten any easier in the last 30 or 40 years because we've gone from these dinosaurs of data center managers that were the top dog in technology in the early 90s, and now a lot of them are getting outsourced.
Truth, accuracy, fairness, curiosity. These are the pillars of journalism and of higher education. At the Wall Street Journal, we pride ourselves on being a trusted and essential resource. The Wall Street Journal is partnered with the University of California, Riverside to provide your campus an unparalleled access to essentials to be prepared academically, professionally, and personally. Students get full access to WSJ News, curated newsletters, challenges, podcasts, and documentary series to help stay up to date. Activate your school-sponsored subscription today at wsj.com/UC Riverside.
Right. Well, and that's part of the problem is technology has changed faster than the private, the public sector culture has changed. Hence the title of the book, Technology versus Government, the Irresistible Force. You've got private sector technologies moving forward. And I think part of the problem, is if you look at news media, if you look at the general public, voters, if you look at legislators, their exposure to technology is current to today. I can buy, I can go on my TV and I can click, in 3 clicks, I can buy this. I can, go to Amazon on my phone. I can do all of these different things. I don't remember what it was. I was flying from California to the East Coast, and I don't remember whether it was my phone or my computer, but I had Wi-Fi on the plane. I ordered whatever it was that I ordered. I don't remember what it was now, but the point is I literally was shopping on Amazon for something on the plane, having it delivered either to my hotel when I got there or to my, and government doesn't have by and large, the ability to do that. And so
you bring up something that's very interesting, and I know we're probably going to get to it. I just reviewed, for our conversation today, I was looking at the website at NASCIO about their top priorities, which they put out every year from a survey they do of all their members.
People who don't know, John, NASCIO is the National Association of State CIOs. All of the CIOs around the country, the state CIOs belong to the organization, and it's a peer organization.
Mm-hmm. And it meets annual conferences twice a year. It's very well attended, too well attended, some might say. It's gone from a small back room when I was CIO to over 1,000 people at the MGM a few months ago.
John, you and I were both at the same conference, and I didn't see you there.
Well, I don't know if that's good news or bad news, right?
I should have texted you.
It's different. It's a conference that's almost it's been too well accepted, and it's gotten a little too large, I think, for what they're trying to do, and that's okay. They'll address that, or they'll die, so they'll have to address that. But I wanted to go back to, what's the priority now? Well, security has been the top priority for the last 5 or 6, maybe more years. Well, this last year, the top issue was security tied with digital services. Now, we say digital service, obviously that covers a multitude of sins, but basically it's service to the citizen done through technology. And of course, government's full of that kind of thing, or should be. Government has many applications that reflect that kind of thing, whether it's getting a driver's license, applying for benefits, applying for a driver's license, a fishing license, and so on and so on and so on. And everybody realizes now that digital services is the way to go. So all these agencies are now responsible for, and departments are responsible for, where can we move more digital services to the citizens, which obviously requires the technology and telecommunications and all that. Well, that's all well and good. But as I used to say, and I've even brought this up to a number of people, that when I was CIO and I had an idea that I wanted to change something, and I'll give you a real easy example of it. I don't even think this one's in the book, so I'm not giving away anything. But I got a call one time from someone who I was actually a childhood friend, and we grew up together with this woman that wanted to get married. She was about 25 years old, and she wanted to get married, but her husband had been married when he was like 18 in California. And they knew I was in California. Maybe I could help them expedite this, because their phone calls would go unanswered and less. So I found actually a whole form that the Office of Vital Records had in the medical Office of Medical Services. And I checked it out, and believe it or not, I found a form. You couldn't fill it out online, of course, but you could download it, fill it out, and send it in. You get your copy of your divorce record. So I said, before I send this off to my friend back on the East Coast, I better read this thing. And I still have it. It's right up actually on my wall here, and I take it with me many times to events like we've attended at NASCIO, etc. And it says, due to budget constraints, your license application cannot be fulfilled for, you know what it said, 2 to 3 years. If I called the director of the Office of Vital Records and I say, hey, I heard you got to change the name of your department, Vital Records. He says, why? I said, if it takes you 2 to 3 years to find a copy of divorce records, that's not a vital record. And that was the case. I wanted to change that. That guy didn't want anything to do with it. That meant work. He wasn't going to change it. He didn't have anybody pounding on his door. If he had the secretary of that agency saying, hey, the governor told me we've got to expedite these digital services, we want them all acknowledged, we want them identified, and we want to fix them now, you'll get something done. But a lot of times you'll find a CIO or an agency CIO or a department CIO that wants to make those changes. Business doesn't want to make it. That's work. That's extra work for them. They don't want to do it. And that attitude has got to change.
Yeah, no, John, I think that's a great example. And I've got a few of my own. It's a bit of a first world problem, but my wife and I last year bought a used electric vehicle, and we bought it out of state. We brought it in here, and the whole process of getting it registered, one of the things you have to do is get a VIN check. So you take it to the DMV. You got to go into the DMV to get the VIN check. They physically look at the thing and, do the thing, and they give you the papers. And then I go inside, and, then I have to come back a week later, and I come back a week later, and the lady says, oh, you don't have your VIN check paperwork. And I had a folder with everything, and somehow we couldn't find it. And I said, well, isn't it in the system? No, like, he didn't have an iPad. Literally, it was a piece of paper that shuffled around. Then, well, if you give the guy who's doing the VIN check out of the building an iPad, it's all right there. How much time and money is lost on these paper processes. So then later, after that was finally all cleared up, and I actually had to spend time then driving home to go find this piece of paper that turns out actually was in the folder. I didn't look in the folder. They did. They missed it. I found it later. Okay, fine. Then get everything taken care of. Now she's eligible for carpool stickers, because in California, if you're driving an electric vehicle. So fortunately, before I started my current position, I actually did consulting in the electric vehicle space, so I knew the process. But if you didn't, the first thing you do is you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles website, and then it immediately refers you to the Cal EPA website to learn the rules to see if you're eligible. Well, why not just copy and paste them there, so I don't have to go to one website, then to another, and then back to another? Just give me the rules right there in front of me. Mm-hmm. So then, but fortunately, I knew the rules. I applied for the permit, and just like you, I could fill out part of the PDF online. Then I had to print it out, sign it, do the rest, and send a paper check in. And okay, fine. I don't want to be perceived as complaining about the DMV per se, but really, from backing it up from the perspective of the book and an academic perspective, the problem with that is not that I had to do that. The problem with that is millions of Californians can go on their phone and go shopping and buy and order stuff with 1 or 2 clicks and have it delivered. And they, and policymakers as well, don't understand, because the policymakers aren't in, the legislators, they're not down in the weeds in these agents. Like, why do I have to go through this process here when the private sector does this? And there's that disconnect as to how to get from point, A, where the state is, to point C, where they should be, and on these digital services.
And of course, the legislators don't have to worry about it because they have their own DMV office in the bowels of the government buildings downtown.
That was actually closed, I'm told. I'm told that was finally closed.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah,
anyway, but it is. I mean, we could go through these. Some are just blow your mind. I'll just give you one more. I think I have told you this, but one of the first things I tried to do in Sacramento was convert to paying vendors electronically. They mail out hundreds of thousands of invoices or checks for invoices every month, and they send it through the mail and they pay the stamp and all this, but it could be done electronically a lot faster. And I said so I went and talked to the Treasury Department, and they said, well, we had this situation where the Los Angeles Unified School District gets a check every month for about $350 million, some huge number that paid for the schools, the teachers, etc. And in order to do that, the LA Unified School District sent a employee to the airport, to LAX, flew up to Sacramento, took Southwest Airlines, of course, went down to the Treasury Building, picked up the check, drove back out to the airport, flew back down and deposited it. And they told me this, and I said, how can they let that happen? I mean, it just boggles your mind. And, of course, I said, well, why can't we do this electronically for all these people? Can't do it. It's a warrant. Warrant. What's a warrant? You remember what a warrant is? Oh, God. It's like a paper associated with a check, but it's not a check. Don't even want to get into it. The problem was they haven't been able to do it. I still don't think they've done it. Well, anyway, it's a huge problem. But now I'm saying those kind of are really digital services, if you will. That's what we're talking about, digital services. They've got the blessing from the governor's office down through the bureaucracy. And now you may see things get done because somebody's finally responsible for it. And if it's done right, they're going to be reporting on it every month, the progress they're making. It should change a lot of things, I think, if this really is enacted. And the way it's going, I think it really is.
Well, I see two potential problems with this. One is one we actually talk about in a couple of later chapters. If you, and you even kind of did the same thing yourself, although you listed a few other services, if you look at the U.S. Census Bureau data on the uptake, the utilization of government services, the two largest groups are seniors and low-income vulnerable populations. If you look at Pew Center data and other reliable data, the California Emerging Technology Fund among them, on who doesn't have broadband, seniors and low-income and vulnerable populations. So the two people, you and I may, renew my driver's license, I may, whatever, very file my income taxes. I don't engage with government online on a regular basis. I do have the one-off examples that I gave you. But, those people who are most likely to engage with government on a regular basis are also least likely to have connectivity and digital literacy skills to understand how to navigate it. You got to remember, as I've joked, a few times, it's like, if you want to, you can't just plop somebody down in the middle of Russia and go, there you go. Well, in 2024, you can't just plop somebody down at the front of a laptop with a Google search and say, there you go, you're good to go. And so, that's one potential problem. And then the other, and I used to be on the board of the California Emerging Technology Fund. It was the first organization in the country dedicated to closing the digital divide. I was there from the inception. I served about 10 years on the board. And one of the things we were doing was looking at trying to figure out how we were going to connect low-income individuals to the discounted broadband offers, pre-pandemic discounted broadband offers that they were eligible for through the providers. And one way we strategized about doing it was saying, well, nobody is, if you're poor, you're generally poor across the board. It's not like you're grocery rich, but you're insurance poor. You're healthcare rich, but you're utility poor. If you are poor, you're usually eligible for, a whole panoply of services from a wide variety of agencies. The problem is you have to go agency by agency and department by department to get those things. And currently the application they're 90% similar, roughly. But you have to fill out this form and then this form and then this form with this agency and this department and this department. And sometimes there's local and sometimes there's state and sometimes there's federal. What would work best is a streamlined, integrated app. I mean, I used to say when we were going through this at CETF that if I ever went back to government, the one thing I would do would be to create the California Agency for, Assistance. And it would be the one consumer-facing agency.
One-stop shopping for all those programs. I've been talking about it for 25 years.
The problem has been we couldn't create enough physical locations for transportation-challenged individuals. The cost of creating that many locations and staffing it was so high, we created them, but they ended up not being practical because there was just not enough of them. We have the ability with the internet to no longer need to create physical locations, but the implementation needs to be streamlined and efficient. It would be like Amazon creating Amazon Books, Amazon Music, Amazon, Amazon Sporting Goods, and each one of those had a different app.
Right.
Really. And so I don't know where the states, not California specifically, I don't know where the states are going to go with this, but traditionally bureaucracies have their fiefdoms. And so this actually may be an argument for a more centralized model so that somebody looks, and for a while, California's gotten better at this, and California's the websites I am most engaged with. All of the different departments have very different looking websites. And it's like, well, kind of, if you're trying to find something, shouldn't the DMV website be laid out essentially the same as over here so that if you're looking at multiple websites, especially as a low income individual, it's easy. And so I see that as a potential shortcoming, but I also see it as an argument for what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, and I know that's difficult, and particularly if it's affecting those groups that are not served as others have served in terms of equity, et cetera. And it's a challenge, but it shouldn't be a challenge to develop those kind of applications that would combine. I mean, I've been talking about it for years. And you know who used to be against it most problems was the federal government. Hey, you can't use that laptop that Health and Human Services paid for to do something over here on the Justice Department. You can't do that. So it was a real challenge, and it still is. It comes up a lot at these NASCIO meetings. It used to, about how the federal government stands in the way of a lot of the ideas that states have about streamlining and doing one-stop shopping for all, particularly Health and Human Services benefits. I wanted to get on one particular point, and that was about the, I don't want to fade, I'm fading from my mind here. I think it's about let's go on. Leave that. It'll come to me.
We're going to come back. This isn't a script. We're just kind of moving around here. So the question, the other question that I had, kind of your idea on, centralizing through the CIO. Right now, the perception and the reality of government is that when it comes to IT projects, government moves very slowly. You talked about the 3 years, a few minutes ago. If everything has to flow to the CIO, does that then bog down the process even more? If we're looking at it, you've got right now, if you want to implement, let's just use my transportation solution from a while ago, where you've got 16,000, lighting units. If that has to stay within the Department of Transportation, doesn't have to leave for approval, that might be a more streamlined process. And when you look at the number of departments, if every department has 3 of those type of projects and they all have to matriculate up to the CIO's office, does that inherently, without, raising the staffing to deal with it, does that inherently slow down IT project adoption even more?
It certainly could, but I frankly don't see it being that much of a challenge. The whole idea of spreading that down to a multi-level organizational basis, where you have the department CIO, agency CIO, state CIO, the information flowing in from the bottom up to the top, being reviewed all the time, because we're talking budget decisions here. And if you can't go through those applications, if you can't have a centralized authority at the state CIO's office to go through and get rid of replicate and replicable applications, then you're not doing things right. So I think there's ways to get that. And I want to go back to what I was thinking about before, and that's this whole issue of that I've been very disturbed at lately, particularly when we're talking about AI and artificial intelligence. So it is I think it's number 3 in CIO's authority priority list. I'm starting to see some things, and I've seen it practical applications right now. For example, there's a technology, I think it's called Spot Shooter or something similar to that. It's about this technology that police departments buy from private vendors, and they can put it in a jurisdiction within their jurisdiction that identifies when a bullet of a firearm goes off, where it went off, locates it right down to the spot, and notifies the police about it. And these are, I think the Spot Shooter has 150 cities around the country that use this. But you can imagine the scary implications of this thing. Where are you going to put these spot shooters, spot shots? Well, where did Willie Sutton go? He went to the banks, because that's where the money was. So I'm the police department. I'm going to put these spot shotters in targeted areas that have high crime. Well, there you go. You're going to have a problem with getting these things approved by the politics of it. And that's true for a whole bunch of different things. That's why I get scared about artificial intelligence uses. I was talking to a group that from the Child Protective Agency, which is part of it's a city thing, but it's also a state government thing. And they were talking about how does a social worker identify when a kid should be taken out from their parents and put into foster care. That's their whole decision of a social worker. It's a very, very difficult job, as you can imagine. And they have different techniques of using statistics, digital statistics, about the likelihood of that kid having to be put in foster homes. But there's all kinds of objections, because once again there becomes it's potentially a bias observation. And those things are going to block AI big time, because you can just imagine the outcry if the people that are affected by this, when it comes to their status in the minority level or whatever, it's going to be a big issue, and it's going to block a lot of implementations, which is going to be too bad. Anyway, I wanted to get that one off my chest before we finished up.
No, I appreciate that. I have concerns about AI, but from a different perspective. I don't know if you're aware of this, that throughout, large portions of the west of the United States, there's AI-powered fire sensing cameras. Mm-hmm. Those are deployed, particularly
in California.
Yeah, well, California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado mm-hmm. are states that I know for sure. They all have them, and what they do is they use AI to detect fires, and they sort between. That AI is trained so it can detect the difference between smoke and smog and fog and clouds, and it reduces response times, which mm-hmm. is the key thing to keeping wildfires in check, is reducing response times. When I hear a lot of
who's against it?
Well, it's not much that anybody's against it. It's that what I hear about AI is so focused on generative AI that I worry that people are going to misinterpret that as the sole AI, and we're going to neglect. And I'm not an AI sycophant. I don't. It seems like the world in general everywhere is divided into you're either for it or you're against it, and I'm much more of a nuanced person. But mm-hmm. I'm concerned that the beneficial AI, and there are demonstrable metrics on the benefits of the fire sensing AI, gets lost in the generative AI discussion. And I agree, there are huge problems with generative AI. I think, the AI can be used in certain ways, but I also think it should be, in the example you used, maybe we do train AI to not make decisions, but make reports. Mm-hmm. And then a human can review the reports to make a human decision, but the AI can sort the ability it can take that volume, and quickly give you the answer. And I'll even use myself as an example here. The afterword of this book, Giving Away a Secret, was written by AI. I was trying to figure out what I should do for the afterward. So I actually interviewed ChatGPT. The same way I could be interviewing you on stage. That was my mindset. If I'm doing a fireside chat with some technology leader, Bill Gates, whoever it is, that's how I'm going to conduct this interview. The answers that ChatGPT spit out were highly accurate, because I pay the $20 a month for the advanced version, incredibly well written, and came out like that. And so versus somebody having to research it. And so there are a lot of, on mundane, and this has been going on for a while, your spam filter in your email is powered by AI. They literally just trained computers to recognize the difference between spam and regular email based on a whole lot of characteristics. And now it's very effective at sorting it. So that's my concern with the AI, is that we lose the ability to understand that there can be some benefits in our haste to avoid the negative outcomes. And something I've said is it's not going back in the bottle. Otherwise we cede AI leadership to, miscreants, to people who are looking to do, evil things with it, or, foreign countries. It's here. We just need to understand it and figure out how we're going to do something.
Yeah. And I certainly see how, this lends itself to the book, and particularly the chapter we're talking about, my chapter. There's so much responsibility here that's on the CIO's shoulders. And things are changing at warp speed almost. And responsibilities are changing. The whole issue of business process reengineering is being thrown on the doorstep of the CIO. A lot of work needs to be done, and it's not going to get done successfully unless they deploy some of these suggestions we're making. Powerful CIO, member of the cabinet, powerful governor's imprimatur, if you will, to have that kind of authority. Department directors that are peers, department directors and cabinet secretaries, peers of the CIO, and departments that have their own CIO that roll up to the state CIO. These are so critical because you can get lost. I mean, it's too big. And you don't have AI really to nail it all down, but maybe you will in the future.
Well, that was good in summary there, John. And really, it made me think of, we could really split this into two conversations. One, exactly what we talked about right now in this chapter, the organizational, structure of government technology decision making. The thing that we didn't touch in here, which is an entire separate chapter, is the procurement process. We didn't discuss it in this in this book at all. It's a perfect question for the podcast. Procurement reform. I have argued, publicly in speeches, around the country that, essentially we buy technology, we being state governments, we buy technology in 2024 like we bought pencils in 1950. And the problem is, if you look at quote unquote pencil technology, it hasn't evolved. The Ticonderoga, I looked this up, the Ticonderoga #2 yellow pencil that we're all familiar with. We all took the SAT. If you took the SAT, you used that. That was invented in 1850. And if you look at a picture, I actually found a picture of a yellow pencil from 1850. It's substantially similar to the pencil you can buy today. Right. Go find a computer from 1850, a cell phone from 1850. Heck, go find a computer or a cell phone from 1950. And the problem is we have a cadre of procurement laws that were set up, to just, to avoid malfeasance, plain and simple. And I will acknowledge that they were set up for transparency and fairness and to avoid, some of the scandals that we've seen. And every time a scandal happens, we layer more regulation on it. But I'll also argue, and again, things I've said publicly, the procurement process is antiquated, and it's antithetical to the way technologies are rolled out. Technology companies roll things out on an ongoing basis when they're ready, not, every 4 years when the window opens on the state contract.
And maybe not even when they're ready.
Right. Well, sometimes, yeah, you're right. Sometimes before they're ready. So it's just, I look at that and I think, in addition to these structures, probably we're ready for some procurement contracting reform. And I don't think, actually, having led, when I was in the legislature, a major de and re-regulation of the telecommunication industry in California, I don't think it's impossible to change the procurement laws to match modern technology, while at the same time keeping the protections for fairness and transparency in place. If I was to change them, that's an important value to me. I don't want sweetheart deals. I don't want scandals. I want to keep those protections, but I want the procurement policies to mirror, kind of where technology is in 2024.
Well, I certainly haven't met, if I've met any folks in state government that are happy with their own state's procurement process. It's everybody's organization to despise. And usually because it's a barrier. It's a barrier to where you want to go, particularly if you're trying to get to this rapid technology development, et cetera, et cetera. Do I know the answer to it? No, but maybe you can use your chat gap or whatever it is to answer that question.
Well, I think part of it is this, and this is, you can apply this is in a lot of places, and in a lot of places to our conversation today is, it's got to come from the legislature. You're talking about a rewrite of procurement statute. We're not talking about implementation administration question. You're talking about a rewrite.
Yeah.
And nobody runs for office, understandably, on that platform. You run for office because you want to protect the environment. I'm going to protect children. I'm going to be the education candidate. You can't run on the platform. I'm going to be the technology procurement reform candidate. Nope, nobody's behind me. Okay, but you have to figure out somewhere in there to get somebody interested. And then, the other thing is there's no built-in constituency. There's no constituency because the technology companies don't really want to rabble-rouse too much, and so they play by the rules that are given. Is frustrating. You're right. We all complain about it. Everybody complains. But I think that
they know the rules and they're used to them. They've done them for a century or more. And anybody that's trying to rock the boat and come in and reform that is, it's going to be more work for them. They don't want it.
But
it's a real dilemma. It's a real dilemma.
It is. But I've said it before, and this book is all about understanding technology reform. We need to perform. If you're really interested in getting to where technology needs to be, in addition to the structural changes that you and I discuss in this chapter, modernizing the decision-making structure of government. You also need to modernize the procurement laws, rules, in order to recognize the speed at which technologies are adapted and deployed and match your technologies, with those. So I want to revisit one thing, and then we're coming to the end of our hour here, John.
Okay.
You would actually, going back to our conversation on, digital services, there's actually an interesting technology, and this comes up again, that I assume we'll talk about in future chapters, called CPR3, Connecting People to Resources. And essentially, it's a one-stop shop in the palm of your hand. It's a cell phone, but instead of it, you walking into the store and buying it, it's a customized solution that's provided by governments, and so there's a couple of examples that on my day job outside of UC Riverside. My day job is working for T-Mobile, and I'm aware of some of these solutions through my work, with T-Mobile. Connecting people to resources is a very inexpensive solution that does just that. It connects vulnerable populations to the resources they need. So there's 1,700 veterans in Washington, the state of Washington, who have this solution, and the apps aren't, Facebook. They're not, whatever. The apps are Find a Veteran's Home, claims assistance. So that if you're a veteran, who doesn't have technology, it's not like, oh, here's the internet, good luck. We're going to essentially we're going to give you an internet device, and we're going to curate the things that you need. So that if you need claims assistance, just touch the app marked claims assistance. Don't try and navigate the internet to find it.
Are they using it now in Washington?
Yeah, so in Washington, the Department of Social and Health Services has about 4,400 people with developmental disabilities who have it. In Colorado and Colorado and Iowa, Afghan refugees coming in, after the war were given the solution in the Afghani language. It connected them directly to food resources, education resources, language training, job training. The Oregon Youth Authority uses it to reduce the recidivism rate. I actually see that as where the future of e-government goes. But that goes back to, the reason I brought it up is that does go back to the consolidated model, because what we can't have is, here's your DMV phone, here's your this phone, here, like everything's got to operate on phone, but it connects you to all of the things that you would need access to.
It seems like it would sell itself.
You would think, and I think it will. You know as well as I do how much the government loves new ideas.
Yeah.
But it is there. When people see it, you can almost see the light bulb go on over their heads.
Yeah, it's kind of your one-stop shopping thing.
Yeah, and I'd love to see that, not just because it's T-Mobile. To me, long before I came to T-Mobile, I was working on digital divide issues. I was working on exactly these issues when I was in government, after I was in government. This is the way government is going to provide digital services to individuals in the 21st century. It really is that model. So as we're coming to the end of our time, let me ask you this. I'm going to give you the final word here before I do the wrap up. Final word is you're the governor of a state, any state, random state.
Okay.
And you're like, hey, I know I've got to do education, but I am going to do technology reform like you've never seen. What are the top 5 things you're going to do, or top 3 if you can't come up with 5? What do you do? No political repercussions. You're going to wave a magic wand. You're going to dramatically transform government, so that it is, and I'm sure you're familiar. So it's like Estonia. The country of Estonia has a project called e-Estonia. That country is probably the most technologically advanced country in the world. Now, obviously, it's a smaller country, under 2 million people, very homogenous in terms of the economic levels, but they've really got all of the laws and policies in place that they are a technology-forward country. How do you do that if you're a state CIO or governor?
First thing I would do is fly to Estonia, talk how they did it.
Okay.
Well, but seriously, I would try to find the strongest candidate I could for a state CIO, part of my cabinet. I'd invest him with all the authority he needs to get things done, and I would make sure that consolidation happens, where all the resources in IT are moved over from all these desperate agencies and put into one consolidated IT shop, and they be responsible for overseeing all IT for the state. And when it came down to some technology, that maybe it's a question of which department's in charge of it or how it would work. That's the consensus that would be built through the infrastructure of having a tripartite cabinet secretary, agency CIO, department CIO, to get all these things done. So that's what I do. And I don't want to jump over the first one, because it's critical you have the right person in that position. And I would like to say that I think that person, I don't like the fact you bring in somebody strictly from the private sector to do these sometimes. I want somebody that's had some experience in government. I know one of the biggest problems I had when I was working in the Reagan administration as a White House appointee. They gave us a book that the Heritage Foundation put out, and it was called Mandate for Leadership. And it talked about how these people would get up, political appointees would go into a bureaucratic office and be captured by the bureaucracy. They wouldn't want to change anything, because none of those people wanted to change anything. I want people that are going to make some changes, that are saying that you can't be happy with the way things are. You want to make changes and measure them in additional teachers, additional cops, additional tax cuts, whatever you want to call it, demonstrable results from what you're trying to do, and make sure that when people say, we're talking about this state, that's the number one, that's the Estonia of the United States of America. That's what I'd want.
Okay. No, that sounds fantastic. John, thank you for your time. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say congratulations on your retirement.
Yeah.
It is well-deserved, although I'm sorry to see you retire. And I know that, somebody like you, retirement is a loose term. You're still going to be very active and involved. But congratulations and thank you. I mean, thank you.
As you know, I think there's 83,000 government entities in the United States, whether it's a state of Maryland, or whether it's a city in Maryland, or whether it's a water district, 83,000. And you know what? Each one has an IT director, and each one of them better read your book.
Well, I appreciate that. Actually, I've been saying that, my book and Jen's book, Jen Palka's book, who we talked to in the first episode of this series, as we went over the preface and introduction, we discussed her book. They should be required reading for every policymaker and every policy student in the country. Not to pat myself on the back, but yeah, I think, she and I are both interested in the same thing you're interested in. Mm-hmm. I want to see government modernize. And so thank you for your decades of service in the pleasure. appreciate that. And then, join us next time. We're going to be talking to Professor Noah McLean, chapter 2 of the book. That really, it was put as chapter 2 because it specifically follows this. It looks at the metropolitan transportation system in New York City and a huge technology procurement failure. It's a case study. It's not just about the failure and sitting around, bashing it. It's an attempt to learn, why did this happen? It's a decision-making failure, and it's a failure of procurement as well. So coming up on the next episode of Policy Matters from UC Riverside School of Public Policy.
I'll look forward to it, Lloyd. Take care of yourself.
You too, John. Thank you. For this episode and the entire Technology versus Government podcast series, special thank you to the UC Riverside School of Public Policy for their support. Thank you, too, to Dean Mark Long, whose support of this entire project was essential to its success. A special thank you to the executive producer and the usual host of Policy Chats, Rachel Strassman. Without her diligent hard work, none of this would be possible. Thank you, too, to the Wall Street Journal Higher Education Initiative for supporting the podcast and their effort to spread the word on higher education and technology in government. Thank you to the Policy Chats team of committee members who volunteered to support and produce the Policy Chat series. Divya Bharadwaj, Dinara Godegay, Derek Pedigo, Andrew Shannon, and Veer Sinha. Also, thank you to the team at the Hear Me Now recording studio for their excellent recordings of these podcasts. Jeff Holden, founder and principal, and Sawyer Malam, the technical director. And finally, thank you to Emerald Publishing for allowing me to publish this book that gave rise to the podcast series. Without those individuals, none of this would be possible, and they have my sincerest gratitude.
This podcast is a production of the UC Riverside School of Public Policy, and our theme music was produced by Veer Sinha. For the latest updates on the School of Public Policy, be sure to check us out at UCR_SPP on Instagram, or for more episodes and content, visit our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel Strassman. Till next time.